Hello everyone, it's Jenny Dodd speaking from TAFE Directors Australia. Welcome to this afternoon's session, A Skills-Based Approach to Digital Learning. In the spirit of reconciliation, can I firstly begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands we are meeting on today. For me, that's the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, and I pay my respects to elders past and present, and extend respect to all emerging leaders and to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people with us today. This is a really exciting opportunity for TDA to partner with Digital Skills Organisation in a by invitation only session to TAFEs to have a conversation about a skills-based approach to digital learning. We have some very excellent speakers with us this afternoon. And to introduce them, I'm going to hand across to the CEO of Digital Skills Organisation, Patrick Kidd. Patrick, thank you for being with us today and thank you for facilitating this session for the next hour and a half. Over to you, Patrick.
Hey, great. Thanks, Jenny. And thank you, Team TAFE, for letting us talk to you for the next 90 minutes. We are very, very conscious as to the role that you play, the importance of the TAFE sector. You're thought leaders, you exist on the coalface, and I think collectively, I think there's an absolute recognition of this need to do things differently. I was really taken by your weekly roundup this week, Jenny, where you talked about Gavin Lynn's presentation, Hugh Guthrie and that NCVR report in 2009, the need for standards, the need for industry having more say. So very much in terms of the language that we use, the approach that we're adopting is all about that. Sometimes I think in the sector we say the same things, but we say it differently and we sort of slightly implode because we do that. So really over this presentation, what I hope you do is to sort of be able to sort of sit back, think up a little bit, understand really where it is we're trying to get to, and help us get there is really what we're looking for when we engage with the TAFE. So over the next 90 minutes, we're going to have three conversations. The first one is going to focus on the environment, and to do that, we've got two outstanding individuals. Can't think of them being better placed. Adam Boyton as the National Skills Commissioner and Kate Pounder from the Tech Council of Australia. I'm just going to ask them to very quickly introduce themselves so you understand where they sit. Adam.
Good afternoon, everyone. So my name's Adam Boyton. I'm the National Skills Commissioner. The way I think about the work that we do at the National Skills Commission is about identifying the economy's current, emerging and future workforce skills needs. As you all probably know, we're doing some work around vocational education and training to support the Commonwealth and states and territories in negotiating a new skills agreement. But if I think about the work we do around workforce skills needs, and I will stop talking because I know I have to throw to Kate. Digital is really ubiquitous. It's one of the core competencies in our Australian skills classification. It appears in every job, and that's probably a good point at which I should segue to the CEO of the Tech Council.
And so,
thank you kindly, Adam. And sorry.
Go on, Kate. That's all good.
Yeah, thank you, Adam, and thank you, Patrick. I'm the CEO of the Tech Council of Australia. It's the new peak body, which is representing Australia's tech sector. For us, we've set a goal of having 1 million Australians in tech-related jobs by 2025. We believe we're on track to create those jobs. What keeps us up at night is whether we have enough Australians to fill them. So we see the VET system and TAFEs as a really crucial part of that challenge, and we'd love to work closely with you to help skill more young Australians, but also in particular to reskill more Australians to enter the sector over the coming years.
Perfect, thank you. So that's not, they're going to set the scene. Then we're going to go to the response, which is really the skills-based response, and for that we've got two individuals, deep experts within the space. I'll hand across to Githani just to introduce herself.
Thank you, PK. Yeah, it's Githani Nia. I'm actually working with DSO as the Director of Digital Skills and Concepts, and quite a few of you in the call would know that I have, a major part of my working life has been working within the TAFE sector, particularly in TAFE New South Wales, coming in from technology, teaching, managing, as well as actually working in the technology sector that I bring to it. So I'm very excited to present at this thing to my former TAFE colleagues. Thank you. Jane.
Jane Schuler from the NCVR.
Thank you. Yes, it's Jane Schuler. I'm an associate with NCVR. Our area is research and development, but we have had the honour to do the analysis and the critical thinking and the concept development of the pathways model. So I'm looking forward to presenting to that for the first time this afternoon.
Brilliant, thank you, Jane. And then that's the second conversation. And then the third conversation is then sort of looking at all this stuff coming together in practice. And for that, we're going to go to an employer that we're working with down in Melbourne, in Cremorne, and to Kangan Bendigo TAFE. So I'm just going to ask Janelle and Carl to quickly say hello. Janelle.
Thanks, PK. Hi, everyone. I'm Janelle Arena, Deputy Chief Industry Engagement and Education Delivery Officer at Bendigo Kangan Institute, and I look forward to being able to talk a little bit today about the exciting project that we've been working on with organisations like Carl's at LiveTiles to be able to share the practice that we're trying to put in place there. Thanks, PK. Over to Carl.
Perfect. Carl, thanks a lot for joining us. Over to you.
Hi everybody, Carl Rittenback, co-founder, CEO of LiveTiles. We employ about 200 people globally, and I've spent 10 years in New York City in the US. Came back with 4 kids and have been in lockdown for the last year and a half. Thankfully, we're out. But thanks for having us, and I'd love to talk about not just the overseas experience, what we've seen there, but importantly what we're doing back here in Australia, and this great opportunity to connect with vet and TAFE organisations to be able to take Australian tech business to the next level. So we see it's a huge opportunity and look forward to talking more about it.
Fab, thanks, Carl. So before we start, we try to be a data-driven organisation. We view every opportunity like this as an opportunity for you to have a say. So we use Mentimeter to help us capture your thoughts and your comments. So if you could get your phones out, and if you could just make sure that you're on menti.com. And then there is a number that will appear in a moment and on a number of slides that will show, which is what you put in to effectively get yourself into the right place. And what we really are looking for is really your observations, your comments, your questions. And then we'll try and use that to really drive an interactive session. It's tremendously useful to us to sort of get these insights. So please do not be shy. Please do sort of take the time to sort of be stimulated and to comment. And let's see where it leads us. So the number is there, 65269781, menti.com. And I'm just going to look for someone to just let me know that that's all making sense and they know how to do that. Is that anybody? Yes, some hearts. I think that means that's good. Right. So first conversation, the environment, the skills gap. Adam, over to you, please.
Thank you, Patrick, and good afternoon, everyone. I think Kate and I are probably going to speak for about 10 or so minutes each. So I've got a few slides I will get through quite quickly. What I wanted to do is just establish at the start the way occupations are changing. And I think when we think about structural change in the labour market, often we think about whole occupations disappearing or jobs disappearing and being replaced by other jobs. But there's something else that happens in the labour market that I think is probably more important and more pervasive and impacts what we do more over time, and that is the way in which we do our jobs changes. And so not only do we see skills emerging within jobs that are new, and if I think about what we're doing today, video conferencing is a skill I think we've all gotten a little bit better with. I'm less commonly on mute when I start talking than I was 18 months ago. So that's a really important part, I think, of understanding where digital skills fit in occupations, that we are starting to see, for example, fitness instructors. When we look at the things that fitness instructors do and the way they spend their time, social media skills are becoming more and more important. Having said all of that, we also are starting to see, particularly in the tech space, new occupations emerge in the labour market. And this slide just talks to some of those. These are occupations that in many cases don't yet exist in ANSCO. And so that's the official classification of occupations that the Australian Bureau of Statistics use. It's embedded, I guess, in all federal data sets from personal income tax collections to skilled migration. The fact that these occupations are emerging and exist outside of ANSCO does present a bit of an intellectual challenge for us at the Skills Commission, because we need to collect data on them. We need to understand how the labour market's changing. But what we can do is web scrape job advertisements, for example, to see different occupational titles that are coming through and the sorts of skills employers are asking for. And so we published a report last year on emerging occupations. And a lot of these, as I say, are in the digital space. So data analysts, data scientists, data engineers and architects, and also a lot in the environmental space, solar installers, wind turbine technicians and the like. We're working with the Bureau of Statistics to get as many of these embedded in the ANSCO classification as we can. But I think if I think about the impact of tech on the labour market, it's twofold. First, it's new occupations that are emerging, but secondly, and probably more pervasive, it's changing how we do our jobs, which means tech becomes an important skill for everyone, which, if I've remembered the order of these slides correctly, the next slide should talk to. But I did not remember the order of these slides correctly, so the next slide does not talk to that. What the next slide does, is just present what we call our Australian skills classification. And essentially what this does is looks at 600 different occupations and breaks them down into 3 different elements: 10 core competencies. These are common to all jobs, so numeracy skills, literacy skills, base digital or digital skills, I should say, teamwork, communication. There are 88 different technology tools. So these are very high-end and very specific type technology tools, not databases or emails. That's captured in the core competencies. And then there are 1,943 specialist tasks that underpin the 610 different occupations. And so what we're doing is not just thinking about occupations with reference to the title of the occupation, but we're starting to think about occupations in the context of what skills are used in an occupation. So therefore, what occupation may be similar to another occupation. And so this lens drives a lot of our work around thinking very literally about what are the skills needs of the economy, as opposed to what occupations do we think might grow in the future? What are the skills that we think might become more and more in demand in the future? What we can also do, and this is where the next slide speaks to what I thought this one was going to speak to, what we can also do is look at these 610 occupations and just ask ourselves how prevalent are digital skills across the labour market. So when we look at these 10 core competencies, of which digital skills are one, we rate each of the core competencies in a scale between 1 and 10. So every occupation for every core competency gets a rating between 1 and 10. 1 in the digital skills space is essentially being able to name an iPhone or a computer or a tablet. 10 is equivalent to being able to develop a new product that might work well with blockchain. So a distributed ledger, being able to implement that, deploy it, assess the trustworthiness of it on a cloud-based application. The most common score you'll see there is 6, which means essentially use software on a portable device to measure, upload data, upload information, check compliance. But it's really quite interesting that what we're seeing increasingly is that almost every occupation requires some level of digital skill. And indeed, even in the care sector, we're seeing digital skills are becoming more important because often information is inputted on a tablet as opposed to being paper-based. So I think for us, this is something that becomes almost ubiquitous. And indeed, in talking to people like the Retailers Association, strong need for digital skills in the retail space, not just to maintain websites and e-commerce platforms, but actually bringing the digital experience into the traditional bricks and mortar space and having sales assistants that are very comfortable using digital products to help sell in a very traditional environment. I might just move on to the next slide. So what this slide does is take our occupational-based forecasts and the employment growth that's embedded in them, and presents essentially what the skills growth would be instead. So rather than forecast, for example, that we'll need X number of aged care nurses or Y number of computer programmers, what we do instead is say across all of the occupations where we do forecasts, what is the expected growth in the skills clusters that we're looking at? And so the 1,942 specialist tasks that I might have mentioned earlier get aggregated ultimately up into 29 skills cluster families. And so what we see there is a couple of things. Firstly, just to read the chart on the horizontal axis, it's the increase in the number of hours worked across these skills. Vertical axis is the percentage growth. And this chart might be a little hard to read at this level, but we can see, for example, digital technologies and electronics, very fast growth. And indeed, if we drill down a little further, the three fastest growing areas of skill, at least that we're assessing in our data, are all digitally related. And it's test computer or software performance, resolve computer application or system issues, and develop or administer testing routines and procedures. And so at a very detailed, granular level in the labour market, the growth in digital skills is coming through quite strongly. What this chart also shows is things like that large bubble on the number 8, which is business operation and financial activities. Bubble size just reflects how many people in the economy currently use those skills. You can see the weekly hours increase is really large, but the percentage growth isn't. And so this is an example of a skill that is reflected in a wide range of jobs. So a lot of jobs use these business operation and financial activities. Remembering, of course, that for us, we've put the digital base level digital skills in our core competencies. And so what we're looking at here is much more technical digital type skills and the growth that we're expecting to see in them. I might move on to the next slide, but I think so. Unfortunately, I think, which is kind of ironic for the title of this this session, my next 2 slides ended up being corrupted at some point between leaving my office and being inserted into the common platform that we're all using today. But what that chart is attempting to show is just to drill down into the digital skills space a little more. And just look at some of the specific skills that we think will grow quite a lot over the next 5 years. I've probably already mentioned resolve computer application or systems issues and test performance. The others, we're seeing strong growth in develop websites or software, ICT support, design and management, install and maintain computer and software equipment, and design, make or install electrical systems or equipment. And what I think is really quite interesting about that is there's a range of different things there, from both the software side to the hardware side to the maintenance side. And again, I think that speaks to the different sort of skill levels, the different qualifications that can support careers in the digital sector, but also the breadth of some of the skills and opportunities in the digital sector. I'm conscious of time, and I'm conscious of not speaking for too long and leaving plenty of time for Kate maybe to drill down in a little bit more detail on some of those big picture issues.
Thanks,
Kate,
Adam.
can I throw to you?
Thank you, Adam. Over to you, Kate.
Thank you. And that was a really fascinating presentation, and one close to our heart, because we think measuring emerging occupations better is really important to help with migration planning and with training planning. So it's great work to see. I wanted to speak briefly on 3 things today. One is, what do we see as Australia's tech jobs opportunity? Secondly, I'm going to preview some research we'll release in about a week and a half on pathways into tech jobs and how tech jobs compare against other high-paying industries. And then the final piece I'm going to end on is what we see as Australia's tech skilling challenge, but also opportunity. So next slide, please. So we think about the tech sector as including software sectors, but also intensive tech activity that's going on in areas like manufacturing, banking, mining, as well as in online commerce. So Officeworks, I was talking to their CIO recently, and he told me he has 300 data scientists and software engineers and does $1 billion in online sales. So many of our traditional businesses, as Adam was showing us, really starting to move into new types of occupations for them and new types of skills. And what that means, if you sum up the value of all that activity, that tech activity across the economy, it's equivalent to the third biggest industry in Australia, measured by its contribution to GDP, and it's equivalent to the 7th biggest employing sector. In fact, there's more software engineers and developers in Australia today than hairdressers or plumbers or solicitors. Next slide, please. And I also want to dispel the myth that the tech sector is concentrated in Surrey Hills and Cremorne or Richmond. Close your ears, Carl, because it's actually a pretty broad-based national phenomenon, as you'd expect when it's found in so many different industries. So of those 860,000 jobs, they're spread across the country, from WA, to Tassie, to South Australia, as well, of course, New South Wales and Victoria. Next slide, please. And this is not an sort of transient phenomenon. In fact, our forecasts, or forecasts that have been done for the Tech Council, show that the value of tech industries is on track to exceed the value of primary industries by 2030 and has already surpassed the value of manufacturing industries in Australia, which makes it a pretty important force for future jobs in the economy. Next slide, please. But right now, and I know you'll be hearing this across a lot of industries, right now filling jobs is our major challenge in our industry, and we are experiencing some pretty acute labour shortages. And so this slide shows you some analysis that we did of Indeed, which is a job aggregation site, and we chose this, to Adam's point, because it picks up real text names for jobs, so it shows us some of those emerging occupations with a little more detail than we might get in ABS labour market figures. And we compare the average time that a job ad stays up on the site and stays open. And what you can see to the left here is jobs like robotics and cybersecurity, but also developer jobs, data science jobs, even UX designers. They're all experiencing more shortages than the economy-wide average. And even compared to some of those other jobs where we're hearing about shortages, whether that's the care sector or in professional services. So we're finding that those STEM jobs in particular are just under immense pressure at the moment. Next slide, please. Next slide again. So one thing that we wanted to understand as an industry was, how do people get into these tech sector jobs, and what pathways do they take? So we commissioned some work which looked at Hilda data, so looked at people over a 20-year time frame. And one of the questions we asked was, is everyone coming from the tertiary sector, or is it actually much more disparate than that? And we have a strong vet representation. And what we found was that whilst technical roles are fairly high skilled, and so they do skew to tertiary educated people, so about 40% of people don't come from a tertiary educated background. When you look at all the other roles across the sector, they're far more evenly balanced, about 50-50 between tertiary and vet. So that means for us, vet is a really big and important part of the skills system that supplies people for tech jobs. Next slide, please. The other thing that we found really, really fascinating was that we compared the pay gap of a tech sector graduate in the tech sector to other high-paying industries. And what we found effectively was that it's really minimal in tech. And we think this is because we're an industry that really values skills as opposed perhaps to qualification or accreditation, in particular because we're fast moving and dynamic. And I think that's really important, because I think there's a very strong vocational element actually to the tech sector, and that's why TAFEs and the vet system are actually quite natural partners for us, because you train in a way that's very consistent with how we like to learn. Next slide, please. The other thing we found was that, because we're a high-paying sector, sometimes you see with other high-paying sectors that they skew to private school educations, but we found that public sector education was actually more highly represented in the tech sector versus people with a private school background. And again, we think that goes to the fairly egalitarian and skills-based nature of the industry, which is looking for people with aptitude, not necessarily hiring based on status or networks or relationships. Next slide, please. And we also found that the pay gap for someone with a public school education is lower compared to other high-paying industries in the tech sector, which sort of reinforced for us it's also not a hindrance necessarily to promotion or pay. Next slide, please. And the other thing that we found was that the tech sector gender pay gap is also lower versus other high-paying sectors, although we still have a bit of work to do here, as well as a bit of work, frankly, to even up the gender balance in our sector. Although interestingly, we found that the average age that a woman enters the tech sector is between 25 and 30. So women are more likely to come to our sector from a transition from another industry or job and reskilling than they are to come directly from the training sector. Next slide, please. And the other thing we wanted to measure was how secure are you if you get a job in the tech sector? And what we found was that it's actually one of the most secure forms of employment in the economy today, whether you compare it across other industries and also whether you compare it to high-paying industries. And I wondered at first if that was maybe because we had a gender skew and more women left the workforce, but we control for that, and that didn't affect the answer. So in general, and I think this would correlate with what Adam's saying, it's a fast-growing industry. There's lots of jobs, lots of demands for skills. So if people have those skills and they get in there, it tends to be a very secure path, even though the industry itself is fast-moving and skills are fast-moving. Next slide, please. So we think that the Australian tech sector has made some really great gains in the last decade. We've had now something like 100 companies that have achieved 100 million valuation or more. But when we look at other economies, we can see that our share of direct tech sector activities, the share of GDP, is still lower, even than a comparator like Canada, and well below a digital leader like the UK or US. Next slide, please. So that prompted us to say, well, maybe we could set our ambitions a little higher. And so benchmarking ourselves against Canada told us that if we could just grow to that level, then we could employ 1 million people in tech-related jobs by 2025, that we could see tech sector activity contribute $250 billion to GDP by 2030, which is no mean feat. Like agriculture, I think, is aiming for 100 billion. And we could make Australia one of the best places to start and grow a global company. And I always feel they sound like lofty goals till I say all we're trying to do is match Canada, but we think that's a fairly realistic way to set those goals, given they have a similar sized economy, similar composition. Next slide, please. But what does that really mean? So in practice, if we were going to create these 1 million jobs by 2025, given our starting point now is that we have about 860,000 people in those jobs, it means on a net basis, we're expecting that we need about another 280,000 workers. And that's because not only do we need to create those new roles, there'll also be some people retiring, there'll be some people transitioning into other sectors. So on net, we forecast that's about 280,000 people. And when we looked at how people are coming in now, we saw that new graduates from university and vet is important, as is skill migration, but actually the transition of existing workers is actually the primary way people are coming in, and we think that's going to be the key area that will increase, in part because obviously there's already more people in the existing workforce, and also because we have some skews, and I think the next slide hopefully will go to this. I'm having that slight fear that Adam had about what slide will display, but hopefully the one I'm anticipating. Yes. So what this chart is showing you is the proportion of enrollees, and in this case tertiary ICT students, which are international or domestic, and Australia is right here on the left. So we have a reasonable proportion of students sort of per 10,000 people, but roughly 2/3 of them are international when it comes to those ICT courses, and we know that historically less than 50% of those international students stay in Australia, in part because of the temporary migration visa conditions. So that sort of means it's one reason why that training system response is a bit harder, because we're starting from a pretty low base in terms of the number of Australian students going into those courses. So in a nutshell, what we think that means for working with TAFE in the vet sector is that the reskilling of Australians, so those shorter courses, those vocational oriented courses, those things actually that TAFE and vet are naturally very good at, will be incredibly important, because we need to probably reskill and transition about 140,000 people in order to come to the tech sector in a variety of roles. But that also encouraging more people to enrol in relevant qualifications that will become feeder qualifications to the sector, it's also quite vital. Otherwise, we will continue to see those shortages. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kate and Adam. Now, if I could just ask you to sort of start populating this, all comments are good. I'm not going to focus in on it at this particular point in time, but I am really keen to get your thoughts around this. I think it's time for sort of one question, Adam, which, and Kate, if you don't mind, I may pose. Obviously, we have sort of the challenge in many respects is around the pace of change, the need to really be clear as to sort of what it is we need to be training, the skill priority areas. You talked at the start around the fact that ANSCO obviously is struggling to catch up. As we go forwards, how are we going to put in place a sort of a system, or what do we need to do to put in place a system that's able to respond to the change, the pace of change within the digital sector, so that the supporting mechanisms that are so essential for the vet system to operate can keep pace and can catch up and can really support the training providers to deliver the training that they need to be able to focus on. Have you got any thoughts around that? Adam, might go to you first.
Patrick, I think the key is flexibility. So flexibility in the way we bring training product to market. But I think there's also something that's important not to forget, and that is we need to, I think, get the balance of knowledge and skill right. So you don't just want to train someone to use the latest piece of software. You also, in doing that, I think, want to embed within them some knowledge about what it is we're doing, why, how this thing works, how it's evolved over time. Because I think, it probably needs to be more and richer than just what's the latest piece of equipment I need to know how to use and what's the software package. It probably also needs to be what are the underpinnings, what might this software package have in common with others, what's the transferability, and I think thinking about transferable skills, which is what the skills classification enables us to do, is probably a way of dealing too with the incredible uncertainty that is I think inherent in a sector that creates and destroys and grows and changes as much as Kate's does.
Thanks, Adam. That's a great answer. Kate, any thoughts you'd add?
Look, I would just say, I think more, I actually think the digital skills organisation model is really important, of setting standards based around skills sometimes rather than very minutely specified training standards and requirements, because obviously that can, in a fast moving industry, can make it harder to remain accredited against them. I think the work that you've been doing in terms of piloting the training design of content and different models and testing that with both TAFEs like Kangan and Queensland TAFE, but also with the innovative companies like Go1 and Academy XI. I really love that model, because I think there's, when I look at all the wonderful innovation going on in Australian EdTech, like a company like Forage, for example, which is creating virtual work experience options, I actually think it's, the combination of the best of the public and the private sector at times that's most likely to deliver that flexibility that Adam talked about, which I would agree is really critical.
Perfect, thank you. And it's great to see the comments sort of coming up. I mean, obviously a massive cluster there around capability of staff, skilled trainers, infrastructure to enable people to operate within, obviously, what is this very, very fast-paced environment. I think, again, the comment there around the mix of accredited and non-accredited sort of training and how that comes together obviously is really important in this space. And I think the need, picking up really where Adam left off there, which is this need for sort of a more flexible model than perhaps the traditional model really is where it currently at, is obviously super important as we go forward. So I'm conscious of time. I'm going to just advance forwards. Please continue to put your comments in there. It's super good. If we can just go on to the next slide. So what I'm going to do now is, if that's the environment, what we're going to do now is look at the response. And I'll just lead really with a sort of a very, very high level summary as to the problem that the DSO is focused on. And to remind everybody that the skills organisation, the digital skills organisation, we're a pilot, we're about trying to seek out best practice. We're focused obviously on the digital environment. We work very closely with the other two skills organisations, mining and health. But really, we aim to learn so that we can take back really what is working back into the system to drive change. So we're focused upon the problem, and the problem for us that we're focused on first and foremost is the idea of the fact that employers can't access people with the digital skills that they need in the time frame that they need them. And when you unpack that, really, Kate and Adam did a fabulous job in terms of really explaining the challenge. You know, this isn't just about digital professionals, the 1 million. This is also about the skills of every person in our workforce. 2.9 million businesses, 13 million people in the workforce. The fact that by 2025 we know that most workers will require some form of digital literacy to be able to interact properly in that workplace. The changing nature of work, all of which underpinning it is this need to be able to not just learn a set of skills, but it's to keep them updated as you go forwards. The current training system has its own challenges. It's slow to respond. We have a bunch of areas of issue there with things like training packages and how quickly they can be updated. But we also have a challenge, I think, in the vet space when you think about the numbers of RTOs. 4,000 RTOs, 2.5 million people going through the system every year. Every single one of those people should be connected, or at least have the opportunity to connect with digital training. And yet less than 1,000 will deliver some sort of ICT training to their students. So really that takes us to a place whereby we absolutely have to recognise that the current ways of doing things need to change. When I think about it, I really come down to sort of three words. Firstly, we need to have a simple system. Language that people understand, language that engages people, learners, employers around what digital skills are. We need to generate capacity to get after the numbers that Kate talked about, but also to get after the fact that we're trying to connect digital training to every single person. So we need to generate capacity. We need to bring people in. We need to make digital careers, digital skills attractive to them. We need to demystify them so that they can engage with it, so that we can move forwards. And then I think the third element is this idea of capability. We have to build our capability to deliver the type of training that we're talking about. And that very much takes us to the subject of this particular presentation, which is a skills-based approach, because that, if you like, is a different way of thinking about the problem, and it's our response really to those three issues. So I'm going to hand across to Gathani and Jane, who will bring that to life. Next question up on the board. We're not going to focus on this, but if you could just, whilst people are talking, if you could just come back with your comments about the problem so that we can gather that data, that would be fabulous. Gathani, good luck.
Well, thank you, PK. I've never had the context set so well in any presentation like what Adam, Kate, and PK did. So thank you. I just want to, we talk about industry-led. We talk about 600 occupations or more, and what's happening in the tech sector. And I want to really look at this with the point of view. Let's just have a look at people, the learners. We were, Kangan and us, we were talking to a recruiter in Melbourne, in Victoria, a few days ago, and they were saying that we've got, they had, with regard to DJPR, they had 5,000 applications and they chose 500 people. And my heart went to what happened to the 4,500. So I just want to say, when we're actually talking about the volume, the capacity, the supply that needs to come through, how are we going to prepare these learners into the tech sector as well? So while talking about employer-led, we're talking about digital pathways. So I'm just going to tell you three stories, very quick stories. So PK, you can rest, about, probably three people who would have been in that 4,500 and not the 500, and some three people that we would have rejected, saying not suitable for the vet sector. One was the story of Luke. Luke is a deaf student. Luke started in Certificate 4 in Information Technology Support, where I was a very brand new IT head teacher in a college in Western Sydney. And when I started, I remember I was quite vulnerable, because when I started, I was taken to the tribunal by someone who thought they're better qualified than me, and then I had to win that. So I was very keen to make sure that I made my mark with the teachers. And I remember with Luke being a deaf student, had a scribe with him. We had the disability consultant, and Luke did really well in my subjects where I was teaching practical networking skills. But Luke actually failed really badly with some other teachers who were focusing on report writing, help desk support, and things like them. And together with the disability consultant, I managed to get Luke actually completed Certificate 4 in IT. We gave him a lot of support, and because of the way Luke hears things, because he was profoundly deaf, and because he relies on the sign language, he didn't have the sentence structures and things like them to actually create a report or a knowledge base for the help desk systems and so on and so forth that he needed to do. But we got him through the Certificate 4, and Luke was really committed to the tech industry. He wanted to work with computers, and he applied for the diploma. And I had teacher after teacher who said diploma is management focused, and even though he's good at tech, because he does not fit into that occupational role that this qualification was aligned to, and as a new head teacher who was quite vulnerable there as well, and the teachers have convinced the disability consultant that Luke was not suitable for the tech industry. And as I communicated this to Luke, the tears were coming down his face, and I thought, we have failed this one person who would have been brilliant at the tech sector. So Luke was recommended to do another course that was aligning with his skill. Number 2, the story of the student I can't remember the name of, let's call him James. Mount Reed TAFE Games Diploma. We were the first at Mount Reed TAFE. As the IT head teacher, I put the diploma in games. He was, we had 15 students who enrolled. They all were in the Asperger's spectrum. So every single one of them in the spectrum. And when the course was designed, it had very heavy software development focus, and the kids loved it. All 15 of them loved it. And then there was a very heavy focus on 3D modeling and design and digital media and so on and so forth, which is needed for a job in games development. And I remember a teacher coming down to my office saying that there was this student, one of the 15, was bashing the keyboard and really hitting the computer because he just could not deal with the 3D modeling, and he just didn't get it. His brain was not aligned to think that way, but he was a brilliant programmer. So here is James, who did not complete the course and did not get into the tech sector. And I had the story of Mario diploma in networking. And Mario was someone who came in at Mount Reed TAFE again. I decided as the head teacher that I was going to just walk the educational path with one of the groups of students. So I was going to teach semester 1, semester 2, 3, and 4, right up till the diploma with one group. And Mario was in this group. So I noticed that Mario was, again, he had everything that you need in the tech sector, but there was something going on with Mario. So Mario had to be pulled back into the assessments and keeping pace with things all the time. And I remember Mario somehow passing, I was a hard marker, but Mario passed every single subject in semester 1, 2, 3, 4, but failed every other teacher's subjects in there as well. He just could not deal with the assessment framework and how things were done. And I remember giving Mario a flexible pathway and just really, taking an interest in Mario and 2 of his students, and I put them into a room, and every Friday I'd lock them in this room, and they would go through to finishing the diploma. And unfortunately, 2 days after I put the actual results of Mario to say that Mario has completed the diploma in information technology networking, Mario was actually murdered in the Mount Druitt Park. He was the first person to, in his entire generation, to receive a diploma, but he was not there. So here are the three learners who's got incredible talent somehow, somewhere in different ways. We have missed them getting into the tech sector. So this is where we actually, when Adam talked about the occupations and digital skills embedded in these occupations, what we did was we actually wanted to create a digital skills pathway from the learners to the employment. And not to say that the employers, when we say employer-led, that employers are going to just describe and paint this picture and create a square, a round hole, and we're going to fit this square peg into the round hole. But it is about understanding the potential of the individual, the skills of the individual to contribute to the digital sector, and the skills that are required by the industry. So rather than concentrating on occupations, qualifications, and so on and so forth, private schools, public schools, we're going lift it up into skills and then create a pathway between the learner, understand the potential, and create the pathway so the employers will employ people for the skills into the digital sector. Hence, the digital skills pathways. So as Adam said, 600 occupations, when we looked at Sophia, when there are hundreds and thousands of pathways that you can create. So in order to make this simple and able to be applied, so everybody, the 4,500 that was rejected can be successfully full and enter into the digital market. We actually went to NCVR, the most reputable vet research organization in Australia, and we said we want to just normalize this system and create a model that allows us to understand the skills of the individual and the potential, develop that potential and channel them through our digital skills pathways into the workforce. So I'm just going to ask Jane to explain how they created that model, and then I'll come back and say how we're going to bring that model to life. Thank you, Jane.
Thank you, Gitani. I just want to first, oh, are you getting feedback?
No, we are good.
Okay. I just want to talk through the development of the model, the components and the application. We did a high-level review of digital skill frameworks internationally. And in terms of pathways, there are very few. So we looked at the European Digital Competency Framework for Citizens, DIGCOMP 2.1, the Digital Intelligence Framework, which is a global initiative, National Standards for Essential Digital Skills in the UK, SOPHIA, which again is a global framework, and the Skills Future of Singapore ICT and Media Frameworks. And we looked at the commonalities and the differences, but particularly the gaps that exist between them. And in most of the models, it's about data and information literacy, about safety and security, about communication and problem solving, and proficiency levels that are based on task complexity and autonomy. But there's such wide differences because you have models that are digital literacy, or they're workforce models, or they have foundation proficiency levels, or they have advanced proficiency levels. And most of them do not adequately address emerging technologies. We also looked at insights from the Australian Government Digital Skills Initiatives and looked at about 50 programs. And what comes from looking at them all, it is as clear that there is no clear, compelling narrative that unifies those initiatives. So when we do the review at that high level, there isn't, I would say, a great deal of guidance. But what we can take from that is some criteria that is the background of this particular model, which I'm calling the digital skills clock, because time is of essence. So we had to consider that we needed a model that was stable over time, that it was flexible and easily understood, independent of tools, occupation titles, industry, or technologies, and it's dynamic enough to capture emerging technologies and innovation skill sets, really well defined, and its structure or operationally needs to include both the essential and advanced digital skills in one model. It unifies the digital skills training ecosystem. It's flexible. This is my top 10. It's flexible to accommodate multiple pathways, and it's adaptable to support that fit for purpose functionality. Now, how do we do that? Well, we've got 4 elements that are composed of this model, and that is its core purpose, that gives it stability, the digital skill domains, which give us structure, the digital proficiency levels, which give flexibility, and the critical core skills, which are the centerpiece of performance. Now, as Patrick was saying, we talk about simplicity, and usually simplicity comes from complexity. But with this model, everything is simple if we can break it down. And knowing how many job roles there are and how many digital skill levels exist, this is the way that we looked at it. And if we can look at the core functions that are required to innovate, design, to build, to transform, to analyze and protect the data and the technology that powers our digital world and adapt to that digital environment, that provides the foundation of this model. And those core functions become the digital domains that surround this clock, if you will. And when we take those core functions and we ask the question, what do we focus on? In other words, what do we analyze? What do we build? What do we design? If we look at the wheel of the clock that exists in this diagram, we can see we're coming from the exterior labeling, digital name, coming in more to the center, and they form more of the core skill clusters. So if we can look at this particular wheel, and if we start from the top where it says digital fluency, I just want to indicate digital literacy is something that's overarching across all the digital domains. And it is there so we can, again, it's about digital leadership and readiness and resiliency. It's about adapting. It's the know-how of what tools to use. It's an overarching a pathway that overrides every domain, and it is influential and doesn't exist in other models. As we go through into the digital design, digital design itself, it only exists in one model, and it exists as an independent model of anything else. And when you look at the game design, the animation, the visual effects, interface design, this becomes a very core segment of this clock, because we're looking at content and experience and product design, again, missing from other models. Another key one, if we look at innovation, digital innovation, entrepreneurial skill clusters, business improvements, emerging technologies, there's never been a place to actually put this and allow this model to be dynamic. And that particular domain allows new, improved, changing, whatever's coming through, because we're not labeling it by technology. So therefore, it isn't stuck in time. It will continue to evolve. And through that, the pathways through that innovation model may eventually migrate into other segments of that particular, of the other digital domains. We look at analysis, which is digital intelligence, is looking at analysis of data and information, machine learning and artificial intelligence. So we have a lovely domain there, which is accommodating all this other new technology that's actually coming through, its applications. Digital transformation, again, doesn't exist as a segment of other models. And it is so key, because when we look at the organizational strategy and management and integration, there are particular types of skill clusters that remain there, and governance, and they sit perfectly in this clock. Digital technology is often the area that is across all frameworks. because it involves software and development and hardware and operations and support. But again, often that particular digital domain is the framework. So we're accommodating lots of different things in this one central masterpiece. And digital security, again, is something that's in every framework to different extents. And so we're looking at cybersecurity and threat intelligence and security of identity. So we have that area of what I call protect. We want to protect something. That's our core function. Now, all these together, if we go further into the center, we have the proficiency levels, which give flexibility to this model. This particular, how the proficiencies are set up as a proposed model, is they have 3 different approaches, because we're looking at integrating digital literacy and advanced professional skills into this one model. So we have a proficiency range that goes from foundation to advanced. They are 7 levels, and 7 is the key number to everything that's in this model. 7 domains, 7 proficiency levels. But these proficiency levels, because they are defined in discrete units, have a flexibility, and that is they can be grouped into proficiencies: digital literacy, digital fluency, and digital mastery. They can be a cumulative skill progression from 1 to 7, or, which gives versatility to this model, is you can come in at any entry point. So you can have a pathway that may have varying levels according to what is the need of that particular package, if you will. When we come in a little closer, we're in our core. And critical core skills are the centerpiece of performance for this model. Because when, again, we look at other models, we look at a commonality of having communication and problem-solving skills. But we've expanded it here because I've been looking at workforce models. And workforce models bring in other things: adaptability, leadership, collaboration. So the critical core skills in the center indicate connecting with others, critical thinking, and adaptability as their core categories. This journey through these domains allows flexibility in that you can build stacks of skills, and they may enter various domains at varying proficiencies level. So if I could just look at next slide, please. I only get to say that once. We look at an example of how to apply this model. Could have the next slide. Thank you.
Yeah, we've got 2 slides,
Jen. Yeah, thank you, that's one. What this just gives an example of, we're looking at machine learning, and in this particular example, and it's for illustrative purposes only, we have 5 digital core skill clusters: business process improvement, data engineering, machine learning, programming, software development, and design. And when we look at the descriptor, if we consider in that descriptor what is the core function. So if you look at business process management, the core function is new and improving approaches. So that is about digital innovation. We're changing something, we're creating something. If you look at data engineering and machine learning, there is an emphasis either on application of techniques that transform data or process data, and they sit in the digital intelligence domain. And when we look at software development and software design, its core function is building software. So it sits in the digital technology domains. And if that were to be a digital skills pathway, we can see we're going to travel through digital innovation, through digital intelligence, through digital technology. Now, if I could just summarize, as complexity becomes simplicity, and the most important thing for this model is we can operationalize it. We take it from concept into reality. This model is transformational for many, many things. And one, it has digital fluency in one of its domains. It has digital innovation and digital design as distinct elements. It can range from having digital literacy up to digital mastery or foundation up to advanced levels in the same model. It has the agility of proficiency levels to take 3 different approaches, whether they be discrete units, progression, or within proficiency groupings. They have critical core skills that are aligned to the proficiency levels and incorporate more of some of the workforce critical skills. And it allows emerging technologies along with entrepreneurship and this continual transformation of, or continual digital transformation to actually occur through this model. So it is dynamic as well. And mostly important, it has all this flexibility because it allows a fit for purpose design in its simplicity. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. As you can see, you could see the language. We've actually taken it from the Australian skills classification and lifted the digital skills out of it and clustered them in the same way. So we're kind of having a continuum from the Australian skills classification into digital. We talk about skills clusters and skills cluster families as per Australian skills classification. We call them digital skills domain, and that's how we bring it to life. Now, really how we create the pathway from, I talked about the learner skills not matching to what employers want in occupations. How do we connect that? We connect that through what we call digital skills standards. So every single skills cluster that Jane just highlighted in a pathway, we actually talk to employers and the employers will build the standards that they want. What are the skills statements that are within these skills cluster, whether it's the ability to apply the knowledge or use a machine, as Adam said, whatever the standards that you require, what are the skill statements within a particular cluster, and what's the level of performance that's expected at work. Therefore, through the standards, we are we're actually putting a mechanism in place to connect the learners, the training providers, the qualifications through the standards with the requirements of the workplace. So that's how the digital skills pathways and digital skills standards come together to connect the learners through the training providers into the jobs that are digital. That's everywhere, whether it's in advanced manufacturing, IoT, healthcare, or a hardcore ICT job. Through the pathway, digital skills pathway, we connect them through the standards. So on that, I'm going to hand over to PK to talk about how we make that happen through training providers and move it forward.
Just conscious of time, but again, if you could just keep an eye on the Menti, please. Just go back up, please, before you jump onto this slide, please, Katie. Thank you. Just to sort of fill out the data there, I'd be really grateful. I think we'll divert for a couple of minutes. I'm really interested in an employer view on this. So, Kate, I'm going to go to you, and then Carl, if you're up for it, I'd love to get your sense of what Jane just briefed. If this doesn't make sense to employers, then we're in the wrong place. So tell me what you think, guys. Kate.
Thanks, PK. Look, it makes a lot of sense to me because, as we saw from that earlier work, the tech sector faces big labour shortages. And the way I think about that is if we just keep doing what we've always done, there's no way that we're actually going to improve on them. And I think taking a skills-based approach is really helpful for employers because sometimes it helps you find more workers with the aptitude and the ability to do your jobs, even if they don't necessarily have the qualifications and the labels that you might traditionally associate as being, indicative of people who can work there. And I know, I used to work for an analytics company before I came here. So I have an emergency alarm going off, so I'm going to throw to Carl.
All right, Kate. Hopefully you're okay there. So firstly, thanks for that. I think there's so much in that, and as an employer, And as I sort of noted, I've spent the last 10 years in the US, so I have both sort of US perspective and an Aussie perspective. There's no doubt that a skills-based approach, in fact, just going back to the great work that Kate's been doing in the TCA, which is really exciting. We're one of the founding members, and to see already it going so fast and the amount of data and influence that I think that we're having in this sector. Well done, Kate, on everything you're doing, and thanks for PK for coordinating this all. I think it's a very exciting time. But a couple of things just back on the data. As an employer, we're looking for people that aren't necessarily have X degree, have X amount of qualifications for such a long time. Interestingly enough, of the soft skills, the people skills, the experience, and we talk about things like machine learning, they are, from our perspective, even though you've got algorithms, unless they're programmed in the right way with the right actual experience, you find things like bias and all those sort of things that are quite scary, to be honest with you, that could get unfortunately programmed into these tech. In fact, one of the things we're looking at working with the National Centre of AI is how do we bring ethics into AI? For example, we don't just want men between 20 and 23 developing all these algorithms. We want people with a broad range of skills and experiences to be able to provide those algorithms. That's just one small example in relation to artificial intelligence. And also people from different backgrounds. For example, I went to a public school in the western suburbs of Melbourne, and a lot of my cohort of people that I've worked with, a lot of other co-founders I know, didn't necessarily have to go to a private school. In fact, I remember when I went to uni at Monash, I'd never heard of like 90% of the private schools. I didn't even know they existed. So it was quite a strange experience. Yet when I came into the tech space, I felt it was quite different. There was no expectation if you had to come from this school or you had to be this certain way. So I personally lived that myself as someone living that. And then the last thing I'd say, just around job security and the opportunity for the vet and TAFE sector, I think this is not just obviously great potential for as Kate noted in her data, that the wages can be very compelling, the reason to come across, but it is also an interesting job security issue. I interviewed someone in New York about a year and a half ago, and they were a bank teller at Citibank. Citibank's one of the biggest banks in the world in New York, and they said, I'm leaving banking because it's too risky, and I'm worried about my job security. Right? I'm like, wow. You're going to come and join an IT company? That sounds crazy, but it's so true in a lot of ways. And I think also the work that I think Kate's doing around, trying to get the technology sector onto the radar, it really is a whole new area that I think is a huge opportunity for everyone. And so it's about how do we take all this great work that the TAFEs have done, and obviously working with Kangan now around Cremorne, I think is a huge opportunity. So there's lots in there, and totally agree with the approach, Patrick.
Thanks, Carl. I noticed that Kate has had to evacuate the building, so she's, I think, probably now sort of stood to the side. Adam, I don't know if you're sort of still tuned in, but if you are, have you got any immediate sort of reactions to that? You haven't really been briefed on that in detail before, so putting you on the spot. No,
it's fine. Look, I was really struck by that comment around designing algorithms. And I might be going a little off topic here, but I think it really speaks to the need to get a diverse range of people in the tech sector, not just the diverse set of skills. And Carl, I mean, really, I'm going to steal that anecdote if I can and use it a lot because I think it's such a great one, with attribution, of course. But ultimately, I mean, part of the reason why we put the skills classification out there into the public domain was to promote this idea of thinking about the portfolio of skills an individual might have, or the portfolio of skills the economy might need, rather than just thinking about the distribution of jobs. So I think, I'm just really encouraged to see people using it, to be honest, and I'm glad that we put it out in the public domain with all the detail we did. So for those of you who don't know, you can actually hop onto the website, download the spreadsheet. It's got all of the detail for everything. It's machine readable, so it's really quite accessible.
Thank you, Adam. We'll keep going because now it's really about sort of how you operationalise this. So if you could just jump forward, please, to next slide again. Thank you. really the sort of the challenge of capability and how do we uplift capability. And obviously I'm very conscious of the fact that there are 4,000 RTOs. It's impossible to get to everyone. So how do we actually do something that sort of begins that process of uplifting that capability? And really working with RTOs to support them, to engage with employers, to deliver training programs that actually employers really want. And almost the first example of that we're currently learning a lot from and actively engaged with is with Kangan Bendigo TAFE. We've been on this journey now pretty much for a year, and with employers like carsales.com, LiveTiles, with Carl, REA and MYOB, so the technology employers of Cremorne. So we're learning a lot from that. Janelle, do you want to sort of like bring this to life for me?
Thanks, PK. So the last question was about a skills-based approach, and so I might talk about, you know, how a skills-based approach for Kangan means that we actually have an opportunity to trial new ways of designing, delivering and assessing skills for students to be able to ensure that our graduates are truly job ready for the role that they're about to step into with an employer. And we know the pace of change occurring in the tech sector is blistering, and the rate of change in the core competencies that are assessed in our training packages actually operate at a snail's pace. So for our industry partners, a skills-based approach gives certainty that a student has the technical and enterprise skills that are required to be able to perform their job to a level that meets their expectations and need. And that can be consistently updated throughout the skills assessment process. For our students, it'll give them confidence that their employability in the sector is solid as well. So Kate and Adam earlier they both touched on that need for a balance between specific technical skills and broader knowledge, which the DSO and the NCVER have been describing as digital fluency. And that's really been the direction that we've been working in, to be able to create a pilot that addresses the need for that balance, so that employees have that transferability and adaptability within their core competency. The Cremorne project is a pilot that Kangan's been working on in collaboration with the DSO to be able to support our neighbours in solving for their talent pipeline crisis. And our Cremorne campus is in the heart of what's emerging as Victoria's largest technology and innovation precinct. We've had lots of conversations with companies around us to be able to better understand, you know, what they need from us as a training provider. And one of the things that we've consistently heard have been the challenges that these organisations have been experiencing in hiring suitably skilled talent to be able to support their growing businesses. Many of them have cited, you know, anywhere from 50 to 350 unfilled vacancies at any one point in time, and that's a huge limiter for growth, and it's creating significant competition between the companies for the best talent and creating a really heated employment market. Despite all of that, though, we've found that many of the tech companies that we've been talking to are genuinely altruistic and collaborative in actually wanting to solve for that talent pipeline for the sector and not just for themselves. So we felt, based on our location and all of the activity that's happening around us, that we are well placed to be able to engage in a pilot program. And we joined up with the likes of Carl at LiveTiles, carsales, REA, MyOb and Info Exchange as foundation partners on this project. And what's different about it is that we're stepping away from the traditional off-the-shelf product, and we're co-designing our solution with industry to create a program that's both scalable and flexible to suit the needs of each organisation that we've partnered with. For us, it's meant, you know, really starting at the ground floor. No assumptions or constraints about what it should look like, what the structure of the funding model needs to fall under in order to make it work. We've really freed ourselves from that, and by doing that and removing those constraints, we've been able to engage in genuine design thinking and workshopping with our industry partners to be able to identify their unique needs and the common requirements for the skills that they're seeking to employ. So everything has been open for exploration, from, you know, how we recruit the students, pre-commencement assessments and various entry points into the program, how the students are selected by employers, what the wraparound supports might look like, the course content, the construct and the assessment methodology. All of those things have been unconstrained in their thinking, and that's really required us to step back from the way that we would traditionally go about developing a new course in TAFE. And we've also, really worked to try and place an emphasis on what the levers might need to be able to attract a really diverse cohort of students that really are going to support culture, gender, age and neurodiversity within the tech sector, and also seeks to support displaced workers from the last 2 years who can bring, a really rich set of life and work experiences to the sector, but are finding the barrier to entry in the current training and employment environments too difficult. So we're also just working with the DSO to then be able to codify the process that we're undertaking so that this can be scaled up beyond Cremorne and distributed across the TAFE network. So by responding to the call to action, to train and retrain our workforce in digital skills, that is a monumental task. And every TAFE is going to need to play its part to be able to help Australia to skill up its workers and to be able to meet the needs of the digital economy and quickly, because we heard them all talking already, everyone that's spoken before, about just how dire this is, how it needs to happen yesterday. And TAFE is really best placed to be able to do this because we have the experience in practical learning. We are, well versed in delivering shorter training durations to be able to deliver for employers now, but it does require us to step outside of the current training package and funding constructs to be able to deliver it. That's about it from me, PK. Back over to you.
Perfect, thank you. Carl, I'm going to come to you just in a moment. Katie, can we just advance another slide? I think we've got another Menti question, so just want to get guys focused on that. So if you could have a look at that, please. And then just cutting to you now, Carl. Really interested in what you're looking for from the Cremorne project, and also to get your insights based upon the 10 years in New York in terms of what's happening overseas that actually is examples of great practice that we should be thinking about.
Right. Well, it's interesting. I heard that alarm go off with Kate, and I hope she's okay. But believe it or not, I was once at a hotel, had an alarm go off, and thankfully it was a false alarm, but it was an active shooter alarm. So you don't have to worry too much in Australia about active shooters. So that's the first thing I'd say. Very different approach when you're living in the US about what you have to think about. But just on the first part. So firstly, I think the way Patrick, the DSO, your team has done an incredible job in the engagement with industry, because I think often we're thought about as a bit of an afterthought, and the fact that you've run these design thinking sessions and obviously with Kangan and what you've done there, I think is pretty incredible work with Janelle to be able to co-shape and co-design stuff together. I think that is the unique part about what you've been doing, and I think that's a fantastic start. And so more recently, the engagement with Kate and the TCA and the Skills Commission and all of those roles there, I think bringing this together is quite critical. And as the I suppose at the highest level, the way I look at the world is that if I go to the US and I look at the 10 biggest companies in the US, they're all digital companies, right? It's Apple, Microsoft, etc. We work extremely closely with Microsoft over the last 20 years, and to see their growth and continued growth is incredible. But you go to Australia, there's unfortunately often a lot of talk about banks and miners and those sort of organisations. And my view is, if that's our business, that's the Australian economy by 2030, we're probably in some trouble here, because there's no doubt every business is turning digital. And I do think we're going to have a great opportunity, which you've seen with the likes of Atlassian and Canva and these sort of companies, to truly create these digital native companies. And to me, that's the exciting bit about the start of what we're doing. So we've seen it with obviously RIA and car sales and the companies that are involved in the MyOp, that are involved in the Cremorne project. But ultimately, what we're looking for is to work alongside Kangan and other institutes where we can, to find the best people that we can potentially upskill and bring along on the journey with us over the next 5 to 10 years. And as I said, those skills, if you've got them, you don't have to have gone through a certain pathway. I think there's a huge opportunity there. But if I combine the work that you're doing here, Patrick, and the DSO with what Kangan's got, we can certainly take these roles, get them into, get a lot of people that would otherwise not be in the workforce, in my opinion, in this space. We don't also have to just necessarily talk about, as I said, software companies or tech companies per se. That's almost every business, should be turning themselves into the tech business. And probably the big difference that I find in the US compared to, and I'm there for 10 years, 3 years in London before that, but certainly there's a higher propensity for people to go out and try this stuff, to people to go and try the tech. And we have a bit of actually we have a New York office, and we have, this big poster there which says "Do more, don'ts," right? And unfortunately in Australia, we're not as open to change as maybe what we should be and could be. And this is the beauty about what I love what we're doing here with the Cremorne project. It's about saying there is this huge new opportunity coming up. Let's embrace it. Let's involve the right stakeholders. Let's get together as a group and work out how to tackle it. And I think if we can do that, the good bits of America, not necessarily the bad bits where you're worried about active shooters, but the good bits, hopefully we can follow the trend and do what they've done over there, and how they've embraced the world of tech, which is why they've got these huge businesses now that are huge global companies, and hopefully we can start to produce some of those out of Australia as we go along. So yeah, huge opportunity, and well done, Patrick, on the work you've done. It's incredible.
Good on you, Carl. Always like hearing you speak. I think that's it's a great expose, Janelle, in terms of sort of where I think that we're going with Cremorne. It takes time. We have to sort of very carefully and deliberately step through each stage of the process, but each time we do that, we get better, we get faster, we get quicker. And what we're now seeing is a range of opportunities that are out there that we're now sort of looking to, or are in the process of partnering up with. We're not a training organisation. So that's absolutely not what we're about. We are about trying to surface the voices of employers, and to really think from an end-to-end perspective in terms of how you stitch this thing together so that we're getting people through the system and into work. So we absolutely need to be aligned with training organisations. It's essential for us in terms of really getting to this particular place. There's some difficult issues out there that we have to really close with together, and to learn and then to scale it. And so when I think about the TAFE and I think about your community that you are, really keen to work with you in the different states and territories to really put in place these programs, which should become much quicker and easier to implement now that we've really worked up that sort of methodology that we have. And when Gathani talked about the standards, what we're moving towards next year is to put sort of 5 standards in a box, so that you can pick them up and apply them. 1 for literacy, 1 for fluency, and then for data analytics, software engineering, and for cyber. And so if that's all true, and if we can deliver those standards in a way that meets employers' needs, really working with the training partners, so the RTO in this particular case, to encourage them to reach out to the local employers, then you're starting to get to that employer-led co-design process that Janelle talked about. And right back to the start of this conversation was the thing that was talked about by Hugh Guthrie. Right at the very start of all of this, back in 2009. So I think that's the potential here, very powerful and a great opportunity for us all to come together, allowing you guys to focus on the stuff that makes you great. So I think that's pretty much it. I'm conscious there's 8 minutes to go. Jenny, I know that you all had some final comments. Let's just sort of dance through the next slide. That's all good. I'll close with maybe three sort of requests and a call to action. Firstly is, we are absolutely determined and keen to listen to what it is you've got to say. So we want you to be involved. We want you to be engaging. We want you to contribute to what we're saying and to our, effectively, what is the hypothesis that really we're sort of increasingly sort of developing and enunciating. We've got a paper that's coming out at the end of the year, which is a discussion paper which really tries to capture all of this in some decent English with a view to getting people's opinions. We'd love you to be involved in our working groups. We have a sort of full range of those. Some of you are already involved in those sessions. It's incredibly valuable to have an RTO's perspective. You are at the coalface. And if any of you out there want to partner to really deliver programs, then we're absolutely up for that conversation. So please do reach out, and we're keen to find proper ways of working with you as we go forwards. So I'm going to sort of close it there from our side. Jenny, over to you, and thank you very much indeed to all the speakers, Adam, Kate, who's now in a far engine probably somewhere, and Jane and Carl and Gathani for really giving up your time to sort of put together a sort of a tour de force really of what it is we're trying to do. Thank you for your support. Jenny, over to you.
Thank you, Patrick, and thank you from me as well to Carl and Janelle, Adam, to Kate, Gathani, and to Jane. We do have a couple of minutes if our speakers are happy to stay on, because for any queries, any questions that anyone might have. We have obviously put comments into the Menti, but there might be questions in the group. So please just use a digital hand if you would like to raise a question. I think one of the big things that I reflect on a little bit here is, and Janelle, I think you flagged it in some ways. You threw out the funding, because I'm assuming that Digital Skills had that opportunity to fund you in a different way. So I think that was exciting, because I think the co-design problem is constrained to some ways by the overarching architecture of the system. So somehow we have to be able to enable that more design thinking without some of the current constraints that I think really prohibit that exploration of great and exciting partnerships. Are there any questions? There might have been some. Yes, there's one here. Peter, over to you.
Thanks, Jenny. And thanks very much, everybody, for a really interesting discussion and topic. I've just come from another discussion this morning with industry and another in a different industry, I might add. And the criticism was that age-old criticism, which is, Peter, why haven't you got more trainers for us? And one of the challenges that we face is definitely the training and assessment qualification impediment and barrier to becoming an industry trainer. It puts a hell of a lot of people off who are keen to kind of give back to their industry, but it's very difficult. It's actually quite difficult for people who haven't come from a training background. The content is difficult, it's onerous, it takes a long time, it's very bureaucratic. So my question is, I think that industry needs to be saying this as much as us training providers are. There has to be a quicker way to credential people up, even to train just kind of one aspect, even if they can't do the full training component.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree, Peter. If we, what we are trying to look is to bring the industry with the specialist skills together, and then get our trainers to actually provide that scaffolding and support and the assessment framework. So, the model we are suggesting, because it's integrated in the industry, to actually use the industry specialists within the industry that are working there, along with our trainers who will actually upskill in the process as well, but to really support that. So rather than saying that industry needs to get the TAE and go through all of that, to break that requirement by combining them appropriately. So hence our industry-led approach. And we always talk about work integrated and the learning in the flow of work as well. So to bring that, particularly in digital, to bring that together. So it's a really good challenge that you have given to us. It would be good to really work through and get back to you about that. But that's the general approach that we're looking at as well.
But let's also challenge ourselves to think about how we can deliver these things differently. So if we don't need to do conventional forms of educational training, face to face, then let's not do it. Let's use sort of free online training. Let's use free online assessments against that training. Let's find a way of getting to scale that doesn't rely upon that critical resource, and make sure that the critical resource is focused upon the things that they can really have an impact in. So I think we've got to challenge ourselves here to think about different delivery models.
And I think it's also, Patrick, in some ways, and we have to challenge the system obstacles that are preventing that industry engagement. And I think Peter has raised one. And I think there's some feedback into the Cert 4, certainly that I've given, that the Cert 4 is not fit for purpose for these for attracting industry people in very agilely into our system, and we shouldn't be able to, it shouldn't be an obstacle. So there might be different levels of trainers that come in partnership ways to achieve the outcomes. We are out of time now. I want to thank the participants, everybody who gave an hour and a half to be part of this. It was stimulating. It was really interesting. It also challenges some new opportunities. I want to thank all of the presenters. All presentations were fantastic. And it really is great to have you engage with us in this very productive way. Over to you, Patrick, for some last minute words, and then we'll sign off.
No, thank you for the opportunity. I've sort of said our piece. It's great to see you all out there. We really do welcome any questions, any collaboration that you want to sort of participate in. But you know, you are an absolutely essential part of the audience that we wish to engage with. So thank you very much indeed for your time. Thanks to the team for putting in the work to get us through this point. So thank you very much indeed.
Thanks all. That's it for now. Bye-bye.
Bye.